We're live.
Well, welcome everyone. This is the Friday, February 3rd meeting of the Thurston Regional Planning Council. I'm going to call this meeting to order and we're going to start with introductions. And I'm going to go ahead and read through the roster. And if you are here as a voting member representing that municipality or organization, please introduce yourself. And then I will hand it off to Katrina to introduce staff who are present. So let's start with City of Olympia.
Good morning, Clark Gilman, Vice Chair and Representative from the Olympia City Council.
Hi, Clark. How about City of Lacey? I didn't see Robin yet. Okay. City of Tumwater. Okay. How about Thurston County? I saw Commissioner Edwards on here.
Good morning, Gary Edwards, Thurston County.
Good morning, Commissioner. How about City of Rainier? Oh, Dennis, you're muted.
Good morning, Dennis McVeigh, City of Rainier.
Hi, Dennis. And I see Robin, City of Lacey.
Yep, Robin, City of Lacey. Good morning.
Hi, Robin. We just said your name, so we're going to go back out of order. How about Tenino? Is there anyone from Tenino here?
Somebody
John?
muted me. There you go. Good morning, everybody. I'm John O'Callahan, representing the great city of Tenino.
Hi, John. And City of Yelm. All right, we'll check back in. How about Bucota? And Confederated Tribes of the Chehalis. Nisqually Indian Tribe. David Ayala here today. Oh, okay, we'll come back. North Thurston Public Schools. I think I saw Graham. Oh, there's Graham. Hi, Graham. And how about Tumwater School District?
Mel Murray, Tumwater School District.
Hi, Mel. And I'm
Good morning.
Hillary. I'm representing the Olympia School District. And how about Intercity Transit?
Debbie Sullivan for Intercity Transit.
Hi, Debbie. Nice to see you. It's a beautiful background you have.
Thank you. Very, very nice part of our city.
Yeah, it is. How about the Lot Clean Water Alliance?
Hi, Carolyn Cox, proudly representing Lot.
Hi, Carolyn. And Port of Olympia.
Good morning. I'm Amy Evans Harding. I'm the new chair. Good to be here with you.
Hi, Amy. Nice to see you. Let's do, PUD. Is Russ here? I didn't see him. Okay. And then Thurston Conservation District.
Good morning, Helen Wheatley from the Conservation District.
Hi, Helen. And our new member from Lacey Fire District 3.
Hi, Liberty Hutzler, Lacey Fire District 3.
Yeah. Hi, Liberty. Welcome. And Puget Sound Regional Council. Probably not. The Evergreen State College.
Scott Morgan, Evergreen State College.
Hi, Scott. And Scott's at the beach. Lucky you. How about Thurston EDC?
Good morning, Michael Cade, representing the Economic Development Council.
Hi, Michael. And do we have the library here today? Timberland Regional Library. Is Cheryl here? No? Okay. I'm going to go back. I see PUD is here. Chris, are you representing PUD today? Oh, you're muted. I'm going to take that as a yes.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Hi, Chris. And I think I see City of Tumwater.
Eileen Surfett, City of Tumwater.
Hi, Eileen. And do we have Mayor DePinto from Yelm?
Yep, Joe here. Good
Oh,
morning.
hi, Joe. And what about Bucota? Or Confederated Tribes of the Chehalis? Nisqually Indian Tribe? All right, still a good showing today, guys. Nice to see you all. I'm going to hand it off to Katrina now to do introductions of staff who are joining us. Thanks, Katrina.
Yeah, good morning. We're going to start with Intercity Transit. We have Ann Freeman Manzanares, Eric Phillips, Jessica Gould, and Peter Stackpole. From Thurston County, we have Matt Unzelman. From City of Lacey, Martin Hoppy. And from TRPC, we have Mark Daly, myself, Karen Parkhurst, Dorinda Merrill, Dave Reed, Berlina Lucas, Amy Hatch-Winnica, Paul Brewster, and Crosby Carter. And I think that should be everyone, but if I miss someone, please speak up.
Thank you, Katrina. Any other staff we missed? Okay, great. That brings us to approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Yes, there is.
Commissioner Edwards moves to approve the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Graham. It's been moved and seconded. We approve the agenda. Is there any discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of approving the agenda, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand or both.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Great. The agenda is approved. That brings us to the consent calendar. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Thank you, Graham.
Second.
Moves to approve the consent calendar. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Robin. Robin seconds. Is there any discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of approving the consent calendar, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand or both.
Aye.
Aye.
The consent calendar is approved. That brings us to public comment. We have one person signed up for public comment today. Ursula Euler is joining us. And I believe Ursula is in the attendee group. Are we moving Ursula over, or is she able to talk if she's in the attendee group?
I see that I'm able to talk.
You are, I see you.
Well,
All
I'm
right,
able to
Ursula.
talk, but you can hear me, I think.
We can, yes. So Ursula, you have 3 minutes, and Mark, are you on the clock? Great.
Good.
Ursula, you may begin when you're ready.
Yes, good morning. I'm speaking as resident of Thurston County. I am attending these days many hearings at the Capitol, our Capitol, with respect to the airport. But as doing so, I happen to be at a hearing for a House Bill 1181. 1181 changes the framework for comprehensive planning, the state framework for local, county, and city comprehensive planning. There are significant changes. The bill is getting quite a bit of support. However, there was a surprising element to me that I overheard that I want to bring to your attention and would be interested in hearing from any of you of what your sentiment or your understanding of that or your interpretation would be. One of the sections, one of the main goals of the bill is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and per capita vehicle miles traveled. That all sounds very good. When you go to page 38 of the bill to the definitions, definition number 32 says per capita vehicle miles traveled means the number of miles traveled using cars and light trucks in a calendar year divided by the number of residents in Washington. The calculation of this value excludes vehicle miles driven conveying freight. That created quite a bit of surprise in the room that I observed. I'm also observing subsequently that heavy duty trucks are not included at all. Now, I don't understand, I'm not claiming to be an expert, but it sort of raised some eyebrows in the room, including my own. And I would just wanted to bring this to your attention. If our goal is really to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which a lot of good people there are speaking for the bill, they all want that. They want to collaborate with their neighbors. They want to do good for the climate, but this could potentially, these two little lines could potentially undo all the efforts that cities and counties undertake. So just wanted to bring that to your attention. At some point, I would be interested in what an expert land use planner, how one would interpret that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ursula. We appreciate the public comment. That brings us to our other business. And the first item up is our 2023 calendar. And we are going to have Mark come to us with the calendar. And this item is for action, correct, Mark?
That is correct.
Okay, great.
Okay, so thank you, everybody. I am, what you're seeing now is our proposed calendar for 2023. Just a reminder for council members that our normal meeting time, date and time is the first Friday of each month from 8:30 to 11. The only exceptions to that, and actually I noticed that it's incorrect on this, is we do not meet in August. And the January meeting, we do the second Friday of the month to give a little more time for year-end close for our for budget. And sometimes we look at holidays and suggest revisions to the calendar because of holidays. The only thing that I'll note for council is that the September meeting is on the Friday before Labor Day weekend. This has happened before and council has chosen to keep it on that date, but I just wanted to call that to people's attention in case council members would like to move that to the 8th, because it would still allow council to occur before the Transportation Policy Board in that month. So that is the calendar. Are there any questions? And I'll leave this up in case there are any questions. Yes, Clark.
Thanks, Mark. We talked about having another mid-year or annual, whatever we're calling it, a summertime retreat, and I don't see it penciled on here. So I'm very much in support of it, and I think we should claim a day early in the year here for it.
Yes, and so actually, in my later agenda item about the strategic plan, that's one of the things I'll ask about, and so just so I'm glad it came up now, Clark, because it gives me an opportunity to tease it, and so people can be thinking about it. But with how we've done it before, it would likely be either that July 7th meeting or that September 1st meeting that we would do the retreat. So the question that I will have for council members a little later is there a preference between July 7th and September 1st to plan for our biennial retreat? Any other questions on the calendar?
Well, my only question, Mark, and I apologize I didn't bring this up before the meeting, is that it looks like we have a date set in August, so we should probably fix that.
Yes, I'll be looking for a motion that does not include the date in August because we're not going to meet in August. So if there is no further discussion, that is what we'd be looking for, as a motion to approve the 2023 calendar with the revision to remove the August meeting.
So moved.
Great. Okay, wait, it looks like Joe might have a question. Apologies. Joe, did you have a question?
No, I was just going to make the motion. You're good.
Okay, great. So it sounds, oh wait, Clark has a question. Go ahead.
I wanted to check in if folks have an opinion about there being a downside of moving the Labor Day weekend meeting a week, or are people just fine with it? We didn't get any response one way or another. And do you already have your campsites reserved?
Ha ha ha. Okay, it looks like Debbie and then Robin.
So I would think that maybe we would move it the September 1 to the 8th, just because people are going out of town I don't have kids in school anymore, but I know when I did have kids in school, it was like a mad dash for everything to get everything ready. So that would be my suggestion.
And I agree. And I think if we were going to have a gathering, I think I'd also prefer it to be in September to July, just because that first week of July, the first day of the week is a holiday because it's the 4th, and then we would be having our retreater meeting toward the end of the week, and it just makes for a compressed, challenging week. So maybe looking at that second week of September.
And so from a process perspective, if council would rather look at a revised motion, then we'd be looking for, and I did not write down who moved, but we'd be looking for the person that moved the approval of the calendar to request that motion be stricken.
We haven't made a motion yet.
Oh, I thought someone
Just
did.
in the
Oh,
questioning phase. So
okay,
if there are
sorry.
any other
I'm ahead of
questions,
myself.
then we
Well,
can.
great.
Yeah, no. So just to keep track of what I'm hearing from folks is we need to have a motion to amend the calendar, to remove the August meeting and to move the September meeting to September 8th. Was that so far? Those are the amendments to the calendar. And then once the amendment is approved, then we can approve the calendar as amended. I also sort of wonder, like, just piggybacking onto what Robin said, whether or not that July meeting is a good time to meet, even if it's not for our retreat, because even if we're not meeting for the retreat, we're meeting that day. So do people have plans to be out of town that week? Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, some people camp, I think. So are people camping? Go ahead, Debbie.
I would just suggest that sometimes in the summer, people are on vacation and we don't get as many participants. We'll get alternates and those kinds of things attending. So I would say the way to get the most members and would be to maybe move it to the retreat to the September 8th timeframe. People are pretty much settled. I know it's just hard for us sometimes to get things scheduled in the 3 months of summer.
Oh yeah, totally. I guess my question was more like, should we keep the actual meeting date? Because we will meet in July, regardless of whether it's the retreat or not. And is the 7th also problematic because of it being in that holiday week? Or should we just leave it and assume that alternates are going to come? Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I just point out, because I've been noticing a change in our climate of late, that any meetings late in June and early in July are going to be very hot. I mean, there's the potential for that.
Yes.
I mean, if you're going to do I think one of the hard things for doing getting everybody together for one meeting during that time of year is heat can be a problem. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. So it doesn't sound like there's any consensus about moving the July meeting out of the holiday week, but that perhaps we would just have alternates, and that's okay too. Okay. Any other questions or discussion before I ask someone to make the motion? Okay, so if not, I'm looking for a motion to amend the calendar to remove the August TRPC meeting and to move the September meeting to Friday, September 8th. And then we'll take action, or we'll talk about the retreat at a later time. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay, so motion to amend. Is there a second? Sorry, that was John who moved to amend. Who is
I'll second.
Well, you're all so eager to second. Okay, Chris is going to second. So is there any further discussion on the amendment to the calendar? Amendments? Okay. Seeing none, all those in favor of amending the calendar, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand, or both.
Aye.
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 Great. So the calendar has been amended. Now I'm looking for a motion to approve the calendar as amended.
So moved.
That's John O'Callahan.
Second.
I didn't see who seconded.
Robin.
Robin. Thank you, Robin. So Robin is seconding. Is there any discussion on the calendar as amended? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor of approving the calendar as amended, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand or both.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, the calendar, any against? Sorry. No, okay, the calendar is approved. Thanks, Mark. Okay, that brings us to TRPC officer elections. And I apologize, I'm gonna have to flip between my screen here because I think I have words to say that are specific. Is that correct?
You do it at some point, but I can help while you're looking for that, just to let people know at our last meeting in January, the chair entertained nominations, written nominations that were emailed to Berlina since our last meeting. The chair will also take nominations from the floor, but just so that council members know, we did have one nomination. Council member Cox nominated Hillary Seidel as chair, Clark Gilman as vice chair, and Mayor Joe DePinto as secretary. Per your bylaws, each person can serve 2 years in the same office, and that would be the second year for our current officers serving. And so the nomination is to maintain our current officers for the next year.
So moved.
Well, do I have to call for
You
nominations?
do,
from the
and
floor?
unfortunately, you need to call 3 times.
Yeah, I have to call for
Okay.
each position 3 times. I love your enthusiasm, John, to get us through this agenda. So shall we start with the chair? Okay, we have one nomination for the chair, me. Are there any additional nominations from the floor? Somebody bonked. Are there any additional nominations from the floor? Final call for nominations for chair from the floor. Okay, so then remind me what the language is that we use here. Do we say if there are no additional nominations, then
you are looking for a motion to approve Hillary Seidel as chair for 2023.
okay, I couldn't remember if it was that or acclamation. I mean, nobody has to acclaim, but okay. So seeing no additional nominations for chair, is there a motion to appoint me as chair for the next year?
So moved.
Thank you, John. That's a motion from John O'Callahan. Is there
I'll second.
a second? Who is that?
Rob Gordon.
Hi, Robert. Nice to see you. Thank you. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, all of those in favor of the motion to appoint me, Hillary Seidel, as chair for the next year, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand or both.
Aye.
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 Any against? Great, motion is approved. We're 1/3 done. So now I am going to call for nominations from the floor for vice president. We have one nomination for vice president. That's Clark Gilman from the city of Olympia. Are there any additional nominations from the floor? Are there any nominations from the floor for vice president? Third and final call for nominations from the floor for vice president. All right, seeing no additional nominations, is there a motion to appoint Clark Gilman as vice chair for the coming year?
So moved.
That's John O'Callahan with the motion. Is there a second?
Second, Gary Edwards.
All right, that's Commissioner Edwards. Thank you, Commissioner Edwards. It's been moved and seconded that we appoint Clark Gilman as vice chair for the coming year. Is there any additional discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand or both.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Last one. We have a nomination of Mayor Joe DePinto for secretary. I'm now going to call for nominations from the floor. Are there any additional nominations for secretary? Any additional nominations for secretary? Third and final call. Are there any nominations for secretary from the floor? All right, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to appoint Joe DePinto as secretary for the coming year.
So entertained.
All right, John O'Callahan is made the motion. Is there a second? Wait,
Second.
who said second, Commissioner Edwards seconds. Is there any further discussion? Great. Seeing none, all those in favor of appointing Mayor Joe DePinto as our secretary for the coming year, please signify by saying aye or raising your hand or both.
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Oh, any opposed? I forgot to ask that with Clark too. Okay. No opposition. Great. It feels like a mandate, guys. Okay, great. So we have elected our officers for the coming year. And that brings us, and thank you for serving, officers. We appreciate you. That brings us to the appointment of the Executive Director Evaluation Subcommittee. We are looking for, hang on, I'm going to get my little script out. Sorry, I don't have two screens here at home, so I've got to kind of click through here. We are looking for members to serve on the Executive Director Evaluation Subcommittee. And is anyone who has served on this committee, would anyone like to share what the committee does? Or I can share, but perhaps someone else would like to talk for a second. Okay. Our process involves a narrative self-evaluation. It also involves a survey process for members, council members, and staff. And we take all of these things into consideration as we the subcommittee crafts an evaluation of our executive director. There is a calculation for compensation increase that's also included in that process. And after that group meets to review all the materials, then we will go into a closed session to discuss, and then the council will vote on approving the evaluation. And I would say it probably takes maybe 2 meetings. Mark Berlina, would you say that that's accurate?
That's correct. And we usually, traditionally, if possible, we schedule the first meeting of that subcommittee following the March meeting. So our March 3rd meeting, hopefully volunteers are able to stick after the council meeting for just like an additional 30 minutes to kick off the evaluation process.
Yes, and maybe I'll bring extra snacks to sweeten the deal because we'll be in person that time. So yeah, it's a great opportunity to look through the policy and like lean into like one of our main jobs, which is to support and supervise our executives. So I'm looking for volunteers. Is anybody willing to volunteer to serve on this subcommittee? Thank you. Oh my goodness, look at this, an embarrassment of riches. So it looks we have Chris and Amy and Joe and Carolyn. Fantastic. I mean, the more the merrier. Does anybody else want to serve? We don't have to limit it, but that's a good group, I think. And then I will be there too. I think I probably have to be there, right? Yes. Okay.
I raised my hand also.
Oh, I'm sorry, Debbie. Okay, great. Fantastic.
This must be a first. 'Cause
I
we're full
mean,
of politicians and nobody's talking.
I think maybe the promise of snacks might have been it. Or I just described it with such enthusiasm that you guys could not wait to be a part of it. It is a fun time. Well, thank you folks who have volunteered to serve. That is a really important part of our work in TRPC. So I appreciate you and I look forward to seeing you with treats on after the March meeting. That brings us to our next agenda item, and we are going to welcome Sarah to talk with us about the Deschutes Estuary. And Mark, are you going to introduce this presentation?
Sure. This is so obviously many of our members have been tracking the work on what's the next phase for what's currently Capitol Lake. And so I've had a few requests from members to get a council update on, now that a preferred alternative has been identified, get an update on what comes next and what we can expect. And so thank you very much to the team for being able to provide that to us.
Great. So this is a item for presentation. And we will reserve time at the end for member questions, but I'm going to ask that members hold their questions until the end so that Sarah and her, do you have a team with you, Sarah?
I sure do. And I'm going to change my
Okay.
name because I'm Sarah, not Tessa. So
Oh,
let me see if I can figure that out.
I didn't even notice your name. So,
Yeah.
so we're going to welcome Sarah and her team to complete their presentation. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll run a queue for questions. Welcome, Sarah and team. Thank you for
Thank you.
being
And
here.
we really should reverse this and say Tessa and team or Anne and team. I served as sort of coordinating the logistics on this, but Tessa and Anne are the real stars here, and I'll be supporting them as we go through this presentation. So I'm Sarah Rich. I'm with Echo Northwest and have been working with Floyd Snyder, who has been leading the consulting team on the EIS process. And I'll pass it over to Tessa and maybe next to introduce herself.
Hi, thank you for having us. I want to say that Sarah totally just undersold herself. She's been a key part of the team, and that's why we're doing this together. But my name is Tessa Gardner-Brown. I'm a senior environmental planner and associate principal at Floyd Snyder. I've been with this project for about 7 years, and I've been the project manager for the consultant team for the environmental impact statement and stakeholder outreach for about the past 4.5 years, working closely with Ann Larson, and I'll pass it off to Ann.
Good morning, folks. Ann Larson. I'm with the Department of Enterprise Services. I am the Assistant Director of Policy and Government Relations. I also have been a part of this for the last 7 years, and we're really excited to be here. So thank you for the opportunity. And Tessa, is there anyone else on our team here? There's a lot of faces.
Just the three of us.
Okay.
Sarah, would you like me to share my screen, or do you want to share yours?
Why don't you go ahead and share yours?
Okay.
It doesn't always work as smoothly over here.
Okay, let me do that. One more click. Okay. Is the presentation showing okay?
It is.
Okay.
It's not in presentation mode yet. It's possible to make it full screen.
I have it just in a PDF here, but I can zoom in potentially.
No worries. No
Okay.
worries.
I think you may be able to go to view presentation mode, Tessa. There is, I think, usually or full screen. Yeah, full screen mode maybe.
Oh,
there we go.
Cool. I didn't know you could do that in a PDF. Okay, is that better? That zooms in. Okay. So we have a couple sections of the presentation that we thought would be helpful to go through with the members this morning. The first one is just a brief background of the long-term management planning, and many of you we know have been involved or tracking this project for many years. So we'd like to show you a timeline that acknowledges that work. And then Sarah will describe the key components of the preferred alternative. Often we say estuary, and that can mean so many different things, and there are built and natural environment elements to the estuary alternative. So let's talk about those. And then we'd like to talk about the key findings of the estuary from the environmental impact statement relative to each of the environmental analyses that we conducted. And then Anne will go over the next project phases relative to current funding requests and future funding requests and the work that we intend to do. And then I think we can pause and have questions around from you all and talk about opportunities for future support. So I will kick us off with these first couple of slides. So this is a very dense slide. The next one is too. You're not meant to read it all, but this slide is a timeline of key events that have occurred within Capitol Lake since the beginning planning of it about over a century ago. And in the 1970s, you'll start to see on this timeline that a range of state and local agencies began to identify that there were impairments in Capitol Lake. That was about 20 years after the Fifth Avenue Dam was constructed. The Fifth Avenue Dam was constructed in the 1950s. And really since the 70s, there have been issues ranging from water quality, sediment deposition, In later, a couple decades later, invasive species really started to become prevalent. And this timeline shows the work that has gone on across the state to identify the long-term management plan. There are a range of specific studies that happen to attempt to identify a plan. And the work that we have been doing over the past 4 years has brought us to the point where formal recommendation has been made so that we can have an end to this long timeline. So let us tell you how we got there. This next slide is also very dense, and I'll walk you through this very briefly. But in 2018, Enterprise Services initiated an environmental impact statement process to evaluate the long-term management options for Capitol Lake. And those evaluated the benefits and impacts of a managed lake, an estuary, a hybrid scenario, and a no-action alternative. And the required steps of an EIS are shown in this top bar in blue. Beginning with a scoping notice and then continuing through development of a draft EIS with technical analyses and then public comment before the final EIS, which was issued in October of last year. Everything else on this screen is stakeholder engagement that Enterprise Services committed to and was intentionally designing so that it could feed into the environmental impact statement so that the end result would be community supported, which is ultimately what we saw. The environmental impact statement was issued in October of last year and was not appealed. And a big, that is a sort of big boost to the engagement that Enterprise Services has done with an executive work group comprised of the local jurisdictions, a technical work group, including the technical staff from those local jurisdictions and the tribe, and a funding and governance work group, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And they also did quarterly meetings with the Capitol Campus Design Advisory Committee and State Capitol Committee and kept the governor's office and legislators up to date, and then convened a community sounding board, which is shown in the gray at the bottom. And the community sounding board was developed to acknowledge and sort of harness the diverse perspectives that existed within the community with members representing pro-lake feelings and members that were aligned with the estuary so that we could incorporate their views and their thoughts into the environmental impact statement to strengthen it. So what did the environmental impact statement evaluate? This slide here shows the 14 environmental disciplines that were evaluated in good detail in the environmental impact statement. And you can see that there are a range of natural and built environment elements that we evaluated. For example, the hydrodynamics and sediment transport numerical modeling was key and foundational to a range of our disciplines. We looked at water quality, invasive species, fish and wildlife, just to name a few of the natural resources disciplines. And then we also looked at potential impacts to the built environment, really to understand how closely these two can relate in any long-term management scenario. So we looked at navigation, for example, the ability to reintroduce recreation, transportation, and economics, which Sarah led.
All right, now we're going to get into some of the details of the preferred alternative. Advance the slide. So the estuary alternative is the preferred alternative. Shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone here. This would involve constructing a new bridge at 5th Avenue, which includes vehicle lane, bike lanes, and sidewalks in each direction. And this would be done before the demolition of the 5th Avenue Dam, so that traffic and pedestrians continue circulation and minimizes the impacts in the downtown, in that transportation corridor downtown during construction. So also during construction, there would be a dredging effort in Capitol Lake. It would remove more than 500,000 cubic yards of sediment that has accumulated in the basin since 1986. This is really important because it minimizes the amount of sediment that can move downstream after construction. And that sediment, that the 500 cubic yards of sediment will be beneficially used within the basin to create new shoreline habitat. So related to that, approximately 85 acres of shoreline and marsh habitat would be established and planted throughout. And that will create diverse ecological and visual environments along the shore. It would also, the estuary alternative would restore more than 150 acres of tidal flats. So then moving down in the middle and south basins, boardwalks would be constructed along the shorelines, and that would be integrated with the habitat areas. We're looking at about more than a mile of new boardwalks that would bring people into the area. And there would also be a hand-carried boat launch established in Marathon Park for kayaks and paddleboards and other watercraft. So it reintroduced accessibility to the water and those recreation components. Towards the end of the construction period, the Fifth Avenue Dam would be removed, and the tidal hydrology would be restored to the full basin. The tidal levels would rise and fall with the tide each day, but on average over the calendar year, it's expected that there would be water in the basin about 80% of the time. And then after construction, an important part of the project is maintenance dredging that would occur in West Bay. And we have more detail on that in the next few slides. So sediment will be able to freely move through the basin, and it would end up ultimately in West Bay. And there are existing activities up there that need to consider with that. So we can switch to the next slide and we'll talk more about that. So the maintenance dredging after construction, the alternative has explicitly looked at this, and it does include plans for dredging the deeper navigational areas in West Bay after construction. This dredging is proposed to ensure that working waterfront and recreational boating and the Port of Olympia, the activity at the Port of Olympia, can be maintained over time. The dredging areas that are shown here in the figure are the colored areas along the shoreline, and each of the colored polygons there represent different areas that we've considered within the dredging modeling. The dredging would not occur in the areas outside of those polygons in the restored basin. So along the west shore there, the western shoreline of West Bay, or further south. So through coordination with the marinas and the Port of Olympia in the EIS process, we have understood that significant impacts would occur from the sediment deposition if and when more than 10% of the leased vessel slips are impacted at any one of those marinas. So the areas down in green and in blue, which represent the marinas, the orange is the access area for that, those areas. So if more than 10% of the leased vessels in those areas were impacted, and if the vessels calling at the port, which is further up in the mauve area there, if they have to wait more than 4 hours for access. So the estuary alternative includes dredging at a frequency that will help stay below those thresholds. And the sediment modeling suggests that could mean dredging at a 6-year frequency at the Olympia Yacht Club down there in the green area, and a 12-year frequency at the other marinas and the area in the port, and then an 18-year frequency for the area shown in orange. This is the access area. And because sediment accumulation is influenced by actual environmental conditions, which means in high flow years, there would be potentially more sediment, there would be an annual monitoring program, and dredging frequency would be adjusted as environmental conditions dictate, and as we reach those thresholds that are dictated in the EIS. So moving to the next slide for a different perspective here. This is an aerial photo. It was taken in 1927 before the Fifth Avenue Dam was constructed. And here you can see that the Port of Olympia, which is up off in the distance, number 1 up there, And then in the foreground, the Olympia Yacht Club in number 2. So for decades, the Corps of Engineers conducted maintenance dredging to support navigation in the Deschutes estuary before the dam was in place. And the dredging that is proposed, that we just talked about after construction, really isn't that different than what has historically occurred to support those navigational uses in West Bay. It's a common approach to maintaining navigational uses within these more dynamic estuarine environments. We should note here as well that Enterprise Services has coordinated with the Corps of Engineers as part of the EIS process and would continue that coordination during design and permitting as these details become more refined. Tessa, anything that you would add to any of this?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so let's talk about the benefits of the estuary. Of course, the environmental impact statement describes impacts and benefits of all of the alternatives, but given that the estuary has been formally identified as the preferred, that is our focus moving forward. So the way these slides are formatted is to go through the top 2 findings from each environmental discipline. So I'm just going to rattle those off, and I'm happy to answer questions on these as we get into that at the end. So hydrodynamics and sediment transport numerical modeling was a significant effort of ours, and it showed that the estuary has lower flood elevations than the managed lake alternative. And that is critically important, especially because of the city of Olympia and the low-lying nature of the city of Olympia. And you can see this next bullet says that the estuary is the most consistent with the sea level rise and climate change plan, including the Olympia sea level rise plan and the managed lake, the flood elevations, for example, in the managed lake overtop those control measures more quickly than the estuary. And then I'll just go to the next one to the right. And so navigation, what we also found with the numerical modeling is that, and Sarah just described this, that dredging could occur at about a 6 to 12 year frequency in West Bay to maintain the working waterfront and recreational boating. So there is an engineering solution that would allow for marinas and boating and the port to be maintained within this estuarine environment. They're not mutually exclusive. And a key part of that is ensuring that sediment is monitored annually so that the dredging can be responsive to actual environmental conditions. And then heading down to the bottom left, the estuary alternative is the only alternative that can meet water quality standards. And the Department of Ecology issued its final TMDL, or Water Quality Improvement Plan, and it was improved by EPA late last year. And it says the same thing. Also, a key finding for the estuary underwater quality is that there would be substantial benefit from the reduction in the dense aquatic plant life that really proliferates every year in the summer. And then for aquatic invasive species, as part of the final EIS effort, we did a survey of the shoreline along Budd Inlet to evaluate whether New Zealand mud snail had been found or had developed a population in Budd Inlet. And the reason why we were looking at that is because New Zealand mud snail pass through the dam in high flow events. They were identified in Capitol Lake in 2009. And since then, when we have high flow events that discharge debris or sediment through the dam, New Zealand mud snail make their way. And so you would think from this over 10 years of kind of introduction or pass through to West Bay, that if the salinity levels allowed for them to survive, that a population would have been established. And we did not find a population of New Zealand mud snail in West Bay. So that would suggest that once the dam is removed, that it is unlikely that New Zealand mud snail would establish a big population in West Bay. And there are more than a dozen aquatic invasive species currently in Capitol Lake, and those aquatic invasive species would be eradicated with the estuarine conditions. So over to fish and wildlife, the estuary, of course, provides a natural transition between fresh and saltwater that is more favorable to salmon compared to the pretty drastic transition that they are greeted with as they make their way up the current fish ladder on Fifth Avenue. And the estuary is the alternative that is best compatible or most compatible with conservation and recovery plan goals that support orca and Chinook salmon. And part of that is because there are a range of reasons, but part of that is also because the forage and rearing habitat that would be created as part of the estuary for juvenile salmonids, over 85 acres of new marsh habitat will be established, and those will be designed and planted to provide that good foraging and rearing space for salmon. In addition, of course, to the marsh habitat, there would be over 100 acres of tidal flats, and that would be the predominant habitat type. And we looked at air quality and odor, and one of the key findings was that marshes sequester more carbon through soil biomass than freshwater habitat. And I think you all have done some research into that, and the estuary is most consistent with your plans around air quality. And we often get questions about what, will the estuary be stinky? And the answer is no, we think no, for a variety of reasons. And there will be, the scent of an estuarine environment, but the vibrant waterfront that exists along the Port Peninsula really suggests that there's a community tolerance to that. The tide goes in and out in West Bay and East Bay, and there are the restaurants and the farmers market and a good waterfront community down there. And this would be no different in Capitol Lake. And then moving over to land use, shorelines, and recreation, one of the key goals is to reactivate that water. Let's get boats and people back onto the huge water body. And the way to do that is with decontamination stations. So the alternative would include decontamination stations at various inputs for hand-carried boat launches, so that recreationalists can decontaminate their boats as they leave the water body to avoid any potential spread of aquatic invasive species. And then, as Sarah mentioned, over a mile of new boardwalks would be established, and the Fifth Avenue Bridge would create new bike lanes and pedestrian lanes that would improve the safety of travel for non-vehicular travel in Fifth Avenue. Okay, so we just have two more of these slides and we'll just keep rattling them off. Cultural resources, the estuary would make the best progress towards restoring a culturally significant landscape. This area, the Deschutes Estuary, is very important to local tribes, specifically the Squaxin Island tribe, but to other tribes too. They used it for time immemorial before the Fifth Avenue Dam was constructed. And we often get the question about, well, isn't Capitol Lake considered a historic resource in and of itself? And in the EIS process, our coordination with the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation led to a formal determination from DAP that Capitol Lake is not considered a historic resource. Over to visual resources. A key way to create a visually diverse environment is through that shoreline habitat that will be planted and have boardwalks. And as Sarah mentioned, we looked at how often the visual landscape would be mudflats or water, and about 80% of the time there would be standing water in the North Basin when you average that out over the calendar year. And then to environmental health, the Port of Olympia is working right now on the remedial design for known contaminated sediment in Butt Inlet. And the goal, and Anne will go over this in a couple slides, the goal is to complete the remediation of contaminated sediment before removal of the dam. And then what we know from sampling that occurred in the EIS that sediment in Capitol Lake and in the Deschutes River has good chemical quality. So its placement can actually cover lower areas of contamination in Butt Inlet, which would reduce the cost of the work that they're doing, and also will allow for it to be disposed of in more economical ways when it is dredged out of those navigational areas. And then for transportation, the new Fifth Avenue Bridge is a big benefit to the City of Olympia and the region. It will improve mobility of all types in the corridor. And as Sarah described up front, the new design approach will avoid a long-term closure because it will be constructed south of the current corridor and reconnected to the transportation network before the existing is taken offline for demolition.
And I can wrap it up here with the last two. Because, as Tessa mentioned, the estuary is the only alternative that can meet water quality standards. The estuary also avoids increased or lessens the increased regulatory burden to lot and other treatment plants. And then within public services and utilities, the stormwater outfalls would also be replaced. And then on the economic side, the ecosystem services that we've articulated throughout the summary here, those have value and beneficial impacts, particularly to tribal populations through those cultural, spiritual, and educational values. And those were really uniquely associated with the estuary alternative. And then there were a lot of questions about how the estuary alternative would impact the potential ongoing investment in downtown Olympia. And our interviews indicated that it would have benefits to downtown Olympia and continue to support that development and economic activity if it is implemented in a way that is both attractive and accessible. So that's the summary across here. And I think we pass it along to Anne now.
Sorry, and I disconnected, so I missed all the good parts, I think, and so I'm back if I drop off again. I know someone will pick up. Oh, perfect. Okay, so at this point, the Department of Enterprise Services had made a $17 million request in the governor's budget, and it was approved in that governor's budget. So right now we are working with the legislature to try to get that included in the legislative budgets. At that point, we would, and so for the request, it's for design and permitting. Design and permitting would take from 3 to 5 years. And what that would do is give us this conceptual design for the conceptual designs for that final design. During that time as well, we'd be getting our federal, state, and local permits, and then we'd pick up our stakeholder involvement. We wouldn't get the money if we received it this year. We wouldn't get the money until mid-year. And then what we would be doing is going after getting a new project manager and then starting the work. So we got a lot to do. It's an opportunity for folks, if they're supportive of the project, to reach out to legislators to ensure that we receive that $17 million for design and permitting, because that's the critical next step in this project. And then once we receive that, if we are lucky enough to get that in the legislature, our next phase would be to actually go to the project, which would be construction. And during that period of time, we'd be going aggressively after federal, state, and other resources. We've got support from the tribes, and I think they're going to be a partner to help us get some other federal dollars. The idea is that the state is responsible for the design and permitting and the construction. And so what's important about that is the more money that we can get from a diversified funding, the better we're going to be from, getting the legislature to have some buy-in if we can buy down the cost of construction. The construction is going to take about 8 years. And Tessa had mentioned this is going to be important because of the portlet remediation of the contaminated sediment in West Bay. So did I miss anything, Tessa or Sarah? Oh, and then this graphics actually shows the green is the DES project. You can see where we're asking for money. The first little purple dollar sign there, that would start in 2023. If we're successful with getting funding, then 3 to 5 years would take us at the earliest 3 years. At that same time, we'd be asking for construction dollars. It could go as far as 5 years. And then the stars that you see there are the earliest that we would see the dam removal. The blue talks about the port-led project, and that's concurrently happening. I think what's important about that is if these two projects happen together, we can find some efficiencies and potentially save some dollars. And I don't know if you talked about, because I totally just dropped off, and maybe Tessa, are you going to speak to the sediment monitoring piece? That's what's in brown, and that would be the next phase after we get construction.
Thank you, Anne. Yes, the brown, as Anne described, is the long-term maintenance dredging that would occur in West Bay to ensure that the marinas and the port could be maintained so that the natural and built environment can coexist.
Tessa, do we want to talk just really briefly, because people probably are aware of the way that we're starting to think about funding that piece of it with the work under the Funding and Governance Work Group and the Memorandum of Understanding?
Oh yeah, sure. Do you want to, or Anne, do you want to give an overview?
Oh, sure. So as part of the Funding and Governance Work Group, one of the really awesome outcomes of that is that we had assigned Memorandum of Understanding to do long-term management, and that would be the sediment management, which you see in brown. The brown boxes are showing estimated timeframes, as Sarah was talking about, where we would do the dredging. What's exciting about that is the Funding and Governance Work Group was comprised of the ports, Lot, Squaxin Tribe, Thurston, Lacey, and the city of Olympia. So, we had a lot of good support with a commitment to enter into, at some point, a more legally binding interlocal agreement to work towards that as we move into the next step of the process. But the MOU right now is exciting just because there's a shared commitment that we would move forward with some kind of shared funding when we get into sediment monitoring and management, which would include those dredging for long-term management. I don't know, Tessa, if you want to add anything, or Sarah.
Just that it's been an important part of the discussion of ensuring the viability of the working waterfront and recreational boating, and showing that local commitment with the funding behind it has been an important part of the project so far.
I guess we should pause. Are there any questions, or is that the next slide?
Yeah, that's where we go.
Yeah. I'd love to entertain questions and ask address any questions, especially about ongoing support of the project and how you can be involved. See a couple of hands up already.
And let's just, is it possible to stop sharing screen so we can see who has questions? Great. Okay, so I know there'll be lots of questions, and I'll run a queue. So, and I'll prioritize folks who are speaking for the first time. So first up, we've got Debbie, then Commissioner Edwards, and then Chris.
So I just might make a point of clarification. The MOU is with the city of Tumwater and not Lacey.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's all right. I just thought I would clarify.
I was actually going to do that, so thank you, Debbie.
Great, thank you, Debbie. Gary, did you have a question or a comment?
Yes. I think the study was great, presentation, great, a lot of good information in there. But I do think there's a few things that haven't been considered yet. And, but the county has signed on to that memorandum, I'd point out. Anyway, if you think about Hanford in Eastern Washington and the federal government's role in developing Hanford, now we've got a cleanup situation over at Hanford, and the federal government is taking care of that cost. They're not going to Benton County and asking for assistance in dealing with that. So the same thing applies here in my estimation. Is my concern is the long-term, the original project and the long-term project. This was all put in place in the early 50s by the state of Washington to benefit the state of Washington, which is all the citizens in the state for sure. So I just my concern is that we share the cost the same with a Spokane resident as with a Olympia resident, to make sure that it's equally shared, because it is for a benefit of the state, not just our local area. And then early on in this process, the county board wrote a letter to the state, referenced the EIS study, and we asked that the upper Deschutes be analyzed along with the lower Deschutes, which the lower Deschutes was the original proposal. And the state, for whatever reason, did not want to look at the upper Deschutes as part of this analysis. And my concern is, and I've been talking about this for years, is the logging activities, that there's a lot of chemical application. There's prescriptions involving what's called urea 46, I think. And it's aerial deposited on all the forest lands where trees are being grown. And I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. It's just the way it is in the timber industry. And DNR possibly might be doing the same thing. Anyway, on the EIS study, there's a lot of logging activity that came into play here. Not only chemical application, but sediment from up in those large logging tracts that really wasn't looked at. So I have a concern is all that the cost be shared properly, and that we take into consideration the activity in the upper Deschutes, because it continues, as long as there's going to be logging, it's going to continue to have a potentially detrimental impact on the lake as we move forward. So just a couple of concerns. Good presentation. I think I'll let it go at that, and then unless anybody has something to add. Thank you very much, though.
Thank you, Gary. It's a good reminder that the local knowledge is critical. I don't know if anyone from the team wants to address Gary's questions before we move on.
Sure, I'd be happy to give it a shot. And then Sarah and Ann can add as needed. So the first question is really about, how funding is allocated or how funding has been requested. And I would just provide a reminder that design and permitting and construction is assigned to the state, and that is reflective of the state being the entity that built the dam, and therefore the state should be responsible for addressing the issues that have been a result of the dam. And the funding that the locals have agreed to through the memorandum of understanding is after construction. So after the project is over, it is about the dredging to maintain the marinas. And so that's really reflective of the fact that, maintaining those marinas is a benefit to all of the local jurisdictions and to really more localized than the state. And we should maintain that benefit. There isn't a legal responsibility for the state or anybody to do that. Rather, it's a recognition that continuing to keep them as part of the waterfront is a benefit to all. And so that's why that funding is localized. It's sort of an add-on. And then, oh, go ahead, Sarah.
Just a little piece to add to that. When we look at the current allocation of costs across all of those different categories, the state, based on what we know now, would take about 92% of that total. So when we consider construction funding and the design and permitting and those long-term maintenance funds.
Good point. Good point. And then the question about how far does the analysis go upstream is a really good question. And it was important for us to really get good clarity around this at the beginning of the EIS. And when we boil it down to the simple problem statement, the question is, should the dam be maintained or should the dam be removed? To make it as simple as possible. The impact or what changes as a result of maintaining or removing the dam is what the EIS is supposed to evaluate. So logging upstream or sediment input or water quality from upstream doesn't change as a result of maintaining or removing the dam. Sediment downstream does, and that's what we need to look at. But sediment upstream should be, and the continuation of that has to be factored into the baseline analysis. But maintaining or removing the dam doesn't move upstream in its impact. And so that's why the focus is the way that it is. And I would say that water quality and sediment input has been a significant part of the work that Ecology has done under their TMDL and water quality improvement plan that stretches up into the upper Deschutes watershed. So it's not being forgotten.
Yeah, thank you. Those are helpful details. And thanks for the question, Gary. Okay, I have Chris and then Helen.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick points here. One is for the members that were around in 2001 when we had the earthquake in February. You may remember the condition that the Deschutes Parkway was left in by the earthquake. It was totally disrupted and not functional. The state repaired it because it is state property. And by the way, if you drive on it, the state patrol often patrols it, which, you know, some of us learn the hard way. But I just want to point out that that area is fairly unstable. That's why the quake disrupted the parkway. So you need to think about that as you put in things in that area. Also, Tumwater has a sewage line that goes down into Lots stuff that broke due to the quake that was along that area above the parkway. So the other two things I want to point out, maybe I should point out Gary's point first, which is I'm a biologist. You know, I've worked a long time, not principally in the Deschutes region, but I'm aware of what's gone on. I've followed the process since I've been involved publicly for quite a while in this county. And what I just want to point out is that what Gary's alluding to is problematic in a lot of Puget Sound and Hood Canal watersheds, which is that root wads and large balls of sediment have been traveling down some of the tributaries, not only of the Deschutes, but of all the Olympic mountain rivers that go into the canal for quite some time. There is quite a large amount of stuff that's working its way downstream over time. So he is correct in pointing out that that sediment load is eventually going to work its way out and even it's out, but it's not all the way through. And it poses problems that Gary very articulately described in the long run. So concerned about that. And I guess the only other thing I just want to point out to folks is with all the biosolids and things, you know, from stormwater runoff, from the farming activities in the basin, et cetera, that have accumulated in Capitol Lake over the years, I think that area is going to need a little bit of bioremediation. You know, I personally have a preference for EM, which is a way to remediate. It's being used by the Department of Ecology to deal with spills of oil waste and stuff like that. I have a fellow commissioner, Russ Olson, who works for one of those programs in the state. He's in the governor's cabinet, and he's fully aware of this technology, but it's been used for quite a while. And I think it would be done in a very good way and a way that could show the path to the future for a lot of estuary restoration around Puget Sound. I mean, we already have some, obviously, with the Nisqually, but I know that they're trying to introduce salt water into the Skagit, at least on state lands. It's very controversial amongst the farmers up there, but in state lands on one of the areas that could be turned from freshwater habitat to salt. So in any case, I just wanted to add those things and to say if people want more information about effective microorganisms, that's what EM stands for. And Effective Microorganisms of America is the group that works inside the United States. It's an international group started in Japan and has been working on the Japanese pollution problem for years and very effective. It's partnered with the Japanese organic movement that most of the public here doesn't know anything about works at the prefecture level in their government, not at the federal level, but would be the state level in their system. So, I could explain any of that if people need more information. It's cleaned up all of the southern, what would be the equivalent to Puget Sound in Japan, that's between the islands and the lower part of Japan. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. All really good things to be considering and keeping front of mind. I have Helen next and then Robert.
Yeah, I'd like to second Chris's comments on remediation and have a couple of questions around that. One is for the first dredge of the contaminated material in the West Bay. Is the plan to what's the disposal plan for that? Is that going to be upland or is it going to be somewhere in the Sound? So that's one question. And then following up on Chris's comments, what is the plan? You said that there's going to be sort of, after the permitting phase, there's going to be public involvement, further public involvement planning, presumably around the maintenance plan. But I'm wondering, sort of in light of Chris's comments and my thoughts about the value of sediment and soft shorelines, not only as ecosystem services for salmon and the like, but also flood protection and so forth. Is there going to be a mechanism for continued discussion about sediment management and best options? Because it seems to me that in the long run, every 6 years is not going to be sustainable economically or environmentally. And I would note that in your discussion about the history of dredging, there's a really big difference between the future dredging and past dredging. And that is that in the past, the dredge was used for fill. And that's not an option anymore. And that is a huge, huge difference. We're not making land out of this sediment anymore. And it's important to note that and not say that it's going to be really a continuation of things that have been done in the past, I think, because there are some real qualitative differences. So I'm looking forward to future conversations about sediment, I guess, and I would like to know how those are going to happen. Thanks.
Thanks, Helen. I'll turn it over to the team to answer the sediment questions.
Okay, thank you. The first question that I heard from you, Helen, was for the dredging in West Bay to address the contamination. What is the plan with where that sediment is going to go? And that's a port-led project. So the Port of Olympia has its own team to advance remedial design. And given the chemical quality of that sediment, it would be going to an upland location, but they are in the driver's seat there and they would be able to say best on the details of that. So I'd defer you to them. The next question was about how do we continue to make sure the sediment management approach is working after construction, so we don't prescribe something that isn't rechecked and isn't adaptive. And what we currently have in place to do that is, after the Fifth Avenue Dam is removed, the earliest that could be is in kind of the mid to late 2030s. The Memorandum of Understanding is the document that prescribes dredging to maintain the marinas in the port, and that is currently through 2050. What it says is that before 2050, those entities should come back together with all of the information that they've learned over that time and evaluate the next steps on how to maintain the marinas in the port. And so that will be a good check base, about a decade and a half after construction, which will give them some good information. And then the last question, or the last sort of comment that you had, was about the, how the how the Corps handled material historically. And I agree with you that 2 of the big dredge events from the Corps' past created dry land, some of it being in the Port Peninsula, actually. And some of those Corps dredge events in the past disposed of the material. So it was a mix. We have good records on that.
Thank you. I have Robert next and then Gary after Robert. Robert, if you are trying to speak, you're muted.
I'm sorry about that. Question, it was discussed the instability of the area around there after the earthquake. And I've seen in other areas when we have a drawdown of a lake like this, and then you see roadway systems failure because the ground is all saturated. Do you guys anticipate some infrastructure challenges in that aspect when we go to tidal repetition of water levels increasing and decreasing? That was the one question I had. And then as far as the sediment goes, I think that's going to be a challenge regardless of logging. We're seeing restoration of stream beds and like large woody debris placed in these zones, but that's also changing stream channels and causing erosion of the bank. And I don't know that regardless how we're going to alleviate that. And I think the dredging is going to have to be a long-term plan, honestly. So
Right.
That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I will say that geotech will be a critical piece of the next phase of the design and permitting phase, and that's typically done in design and permitting. So there will be a significant site survey of the Deschutes Parkway, as was mentioned earlier, and relative to the changing of kind of water pressure, that is currently understood by the team. It will be further evaluated in design and permitting, but the conceptual design assumes that the shoreline across or next to Deschutes Parkway will be armored. There will be a buttress placed to improve the stability. So that, in addition to, upland measures that need to be taken, and there's an assumed MSE wall that would be constructed to support the Deschutes Parkway reconfiguration. So all of that at a conceptual level, with acknowledgement that it needs to be explored in very good detail and design. Similarly, with how do we construct a river channel that is that doesn't increase or exacerbate erosion. We have numerical modeling that will support that, but a key component of that will also be working with the regulatory agencies, so WDFW and their evolving research, and the tribes, of course, and so that would be a focus of the next phase of design as well. And long-term long-term dredging is assumed.
Thank you. Gary, did you have a follow-up question? I saw your hand go up, but now it's down, so I want to make sure.
Yeah, I do. I think it was just mentioned that there would need to be upland consideration as far as sediment issues, but I don't know if I said or not, but when we wrote the letter to the state requesting an upriver analysis, they denied us of that. They said, well, no, all it's going to take is just the lowland. So we never did get an upland analysis, in fact, and I don't know how we can have upland consideration if we don't look at upland analysis first to have a comparison model to work with. And then when it comes to the cost to the port of that long-term sediment and the handling of the whole port thing, I don't think the locals ought to be paying for that. I really think this is a state issue, and maybe at some point that can be diverted to local, but I think some of that analysis needs to be done, and we need to look and make sure, do we have adequate setback on our logging issues and stuff? As Chris mentioned, it's going to be an ongoing problem. So maybe we need to have enhanced setbacks in particular areas that could be more damaging to this whole situation. So those are just some of my concerns. Thanks.
Thanks, Gary. Sounds like we need to have a conversation about some water quality issues in other parts of the catchment. Robert, is that an old hand or a new hand? I think it's an old hand.
It's an old one. I
Okay.
didn't realize my phone died, so I had to log back in. I'm sorry.
No worries. I just didn't want to skip over you. I see Mark has something he'd like to contribute, and then Chris would like to make another contribution. Go ahead, Mark.
I do have a quick question, which is, you talked about how the port remediation needs to happen before construction can happen related to the dam and creating the estuary. I know that Port of Olympia has a capital budget request and DES has a capital budget request. What happens to the schedule on page 20 if DES were to get its budget request, but the port did not?
Do you want to go first, Ann, or shall I?
Go ahead, Tessa.
I will say that the current plan is to allow for remediation to happen ahead of removal of the dam. And so there would need to be a sync in the schedules for construction of the Deschutes estuary relative to construction or remediation in Bud Inlet. There's a couple of years of float in the schedule right now that you can see the gap between the port completing its and the estuary completing its. So it's conceivable that, that the estuary design could go ahead for 2 years because it's going to be a 2-year longer process than the port. That's not ideal. And I think that Anne is not hearing that would be the case based on current legislative interests and question. But Anne, I'll punt to you there.
Yeah, Mark, that's a great question. What's interesting too, the port has a different funding. I don't know exactly their numbers. I don't want to speak for them, but they're different pots of money that they're going after. And also, I think just because it's a remediation, that there seems to be a lot of momentum for the ports to receive funding. And so I don't think we're as concerned, but as Tessa mentioned, obviously that's a consideration as the timing of these two projects. And so we'll have to be adaptive, seeing how that funding works, but it's a good question.
That's helpful. Thank you.
I'm not seeing that as being an issue.
Okay, great. It looks like Chris has another contribution and then we'll try and wrap it up. Go ahead, Chris.
Thanks again. Two things. First, maybe this is a Karen Parkhurst question. Do we have the backing of our state delegation for the 22nd district? I remember Sam as not being too pro-estuary years ago.
I cannot speak to that as we have not asked that specific question. But
well, I remember both Karen Fraser and Sam being against the estuary project for quite a long time. Maybe it was the concerns that the yacht club and others had about allowing sediment to go downstream again, but and maybe those were addressed, but maybe not. And why I asked that question is legislature generally does not push forward projects that their legislative members who represent those districts don't like. I've seen that happen many times in the legislature. So, they need to be on board if you're going to get this through. And the second point I just wanted to make about smell, about, the odor, about bioremediation in general is it is an effective way to take care of that problem. The problem that already exists in downtown Olympia because of the deoxidized situation when the algae dies that's growing on the surface, drops to the bottom, rots, you smell it when the tide goes out. That's what bioremediation handles. It gets rid of that excess carbon that's there, ferments it away. So I'm just trying to indicate to you, this has been a long-term water quality problem of all of Butt Inlet that I've followed since I've been involved with the Deschutes estuaries. The state has never solved the problem of southern Butt Inlet, and that's why not much has happened with that, with the Department of Ecology over the many years that I've tracked this, which is decades now. So I just want to point out to you guys that bioremediation can make the estuary more alive. And when I first came into this community in the 70s, so I'm an old timer now, I will just point out to you guys, I saw back in those days, forage fish, specifically smelt, surf smelt, spawning all up and down Butt Inlet. They died as the lot project went through and as the area became more and more, no oxygen present, they couldn't survive there. But that would all come back if the oxygen returns to the waters. And you'll see it very quickly because there's plenty of smelt spawning in the rest of South Puget Sound. So they would slowly take the area back. So, you'll see benefits almost immediately once the oxygen returns. Thank you.
Chris. I've got Anne and then Clark, and then I think we'll wrap it up.
And Chris, I just want to say that's great contributions. It's really interesting, and we'll have to explore that. I did want to speak to the legislative engagement. We have been having conversations with the 22nd delegation. I know that Representative Dolio has been very engaged in this project, as well as Representative Bateman. Senator Hunt, I think he's been clear about what his position was several years back, but I think there's been a shift right now, because if you go back to that second slide that Tessa showed, this robust stakeholder engagement that we've had, really engaging the community at the municipality level as well as the community. I think that's been an important value for the senator, and I can't speak to him where he's at right now, but the value of having the community supporting a project is really important to see this be successful. We've also engaged with the congressional delegation, as well as our capital budget writers and those that are proponents of, in the environmental committees on the legislature as well. This year, we're making the rounds with the legislature. Of course, we couldn't have that engagement until we knew what that alternative was going to be. And so that now that DES in the state has chosen the estuary as being the alternative, now we're all hands on deck, educating folks about what the benefits of that estuary is going to be, and then providing some understanding about the funding, the sediment management, on all of that. And so we're at this really critical stage of engagement with the legislature. However, the 22nd delegation has been a part of those discussions and understand that community engagement has been a big part of it, backed by a lot of the science as well. So, but great points, Chris. Really appreciate you contributing.
Thank you, Anne. Clark, go ahead.
Thank you, Hillary. So I just wanted to appreciate that I all of the suggestions and feedback, that there's going to be a lot of decisions to make about how the restoration happens, as we go along. But I think what we're receiving today and kind of celebrating is 7 years in this particular run. For other people, 10, 20 years, maybe since 1950, it's right, or since they closed the swimming at Capitol Lake and took away the Bavarian Wurst, wherever you measure it from, it's been a very long time. And what we have right now is a preferred alternative and an agreement between the governments about cost sharing some of these costs. So I think it's a milestone. So it's kind of a celebration of the culmination of many elements of this project. And so I just wanted to sort of balance that all of the good ideas are still going to be important because we have more to figure out about how to do the restoration. But in principle, we've agreed that this is the preferred alternative, and we've agreed how we might share the costs. So.
Yes. You took my closing remarks, Clark.
I'll give them right back to you. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just kidding. So much appreciation for, the work that has gone into this, for taking the time to come and spell out that work. Especially, I really appreciate the how you explicitly addressed all of the community concerns. And I think that does do so much to really strengthen the collective commitment to the preferred alternative. And something that hasn't been brought up that I will just like mention to you as you're going out and sharing with folks about this, because I come from a school's perspective. It's also a really beautiful way for us to teach our children how we can fix problems that we create. That we have the ability and the power to remedy the mistakes, and that everyone makes them, even governments and people who are well-intentioned and who miss swimming in the lake or what have you. I see this as such a wonderful opportunity. My kids will be done in school by the time this is complete, but what a wonderful gift the state and our community can give back to our children in the form of this living classroom and also this living lesson in good government and cleaning up after ourselves when we know and we learn how to do better. So thank you very much. We are scheduled for a break, but we're running a little late, but breaks are important because our wellness is important. So we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back to talk about the strategic plan. So let's plan to return at 10:10. Sound good?
And thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, Hillary, I just want to make a final point about the estuary. One of the reasons the bridge went in was to get rid of Little Hollywood, which was the houseboat community that was down there. And it was very interesting when Governor Locke commented that his ancestor lived in that community. So there is a bit of history about Capitol Lake and what it was when it was an estuary last, that most people have glossed over the whole Little Hollywood stuff or whatever they called that place, where all the houseboats were.
Yeah.
So there is a reason why it went through and got beautified and where it is today.
Yep. Good learning to be had. Thanks for the reminder, Chris. Okay, see everybody at 10:10. Is everybody back? Mostly. Mark, are we having you begin this conversation?
Yes.
Okay, great.
I'm gonna give a little presentation here.
Oh, okay, great. Well, take it away, Mark. And let's hold questions till the end. Does that work? Or comments?
It does.
Okay, great.
All right. I am going to share my screen. And get it into presentation. All right. Okay. Well, thanks everybody. The problem you get when you hire a planner to be the executive director of a planning organization is I like planning. and I really see the value in strategic planning in particular to really set the stage for what does our council want to be doing and want staff to be doing and think we need to be doing as the work for our membership. And as people know, there's a lot of our work, especially our transportation work, is kind of must-dos that are associated with our funding. But we also, a fair amount of our budget comes from contracts and grants that we seek and from the member assessments. And those dollars have a little more flexibility in what we do with them, and especially grants. We can target grants that meet the priorities of council. And so when I first came on in 2016, we created the first strategic plan for the organization, the 2017-2019 strategic plan. And then we updated that for 2020 to 2022. And I'm going to go over some of the highlights of what is in that current strategic plan so that we can talk a little bit about process for creating a 2023 to 2025 strategic plan. So just to orient you to how we as staff view the flow, we've got the strategic plan, which is created and adopted by council and really sets that high level, not really getting into the weeds, but the high level, what are the things that we as a council want to be working on, not the laundry list of everything we do, but some key strategic initiatives that we want to make sure that we are getting into over the next 2 years. And then we as staff, we take that strategic direction, and it's what helps form the work program that you adopt each year. You adopted the 2023 work program in 2022, December. And the Unified Planning Work Program, which is the work program that we have for the transportation funding that we receive. And so strategic plan flows into our annual work program and the Unified Planning Work Program. So for the current strategic plan, we've got kind of our big three that have traditionally been part of what TRPC does, which is transportation, land use and sustainability, and environmental stewardship. And actually, I'd add education and outreach to that as well. And at the 2019 retreat, the council at that time also wanted to see more emphasis on economic opportunity and housing. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we've done in those areas over the past couple of years. So on the transportation side, the strategic plan emphasized maintaining and preserving infrastructure and enhancing multimodal systems. And so these are just some of the examples of things we've done that are responsive to that. Is we have started the state of our transportation system that council has been briefed on a few times now, looking at things like pavement condition across our region, bridge condition, where do we have safety issues on our roadways, we transitioned to a criteria supported call for projects so that we are making sure that the projects that council decides to fund are in alignment with the strategic direction that council and Transportation Policy Board have set for us. And then we received funding from council back in, I believe that one was 2021, to start looking at high capacity transportation options for our region, looking at things like enhanced express bus service to the north, the potential for rail and when that might make sense. And the legislature appreciated the work that we were doing so much that they gave us in the last budget an additional $250,000 because the state really wants to make sure that our region has looked at the feasibility of different high capacity transportation options along with the consideration of I-5 and the Nisqually Delta, so that the work that we're doing together to address issues on I-5 also support the potential high capacity transportation options of the future. Land use and sustainability. It's one of the main reasons that our council, we took on leading Thurston's 2020 Census Complete Count Committee. The census data is so important to the work that we do. And so taking on that responsibility to lead really helps make sure we have the data that we depend on for our land use and sustainability work. The Martin Way Corridor study, a lot of people, you might think of that as a transportation project, and it is, but those corridor projects are really about the integration of land use and transportation so that the decisions we're making are sustainable and provide for that sustainability long-term into the future. Our rural mobility study, also, you think of that as a transportation project, but with its focus to identify options to improve safety and mobility without widening roadways is really in alignment with our land use and sustainability efforts to keep the rural areas rural and working as ag lands and forest lands, and concentrating growth in the urban areas. Environmental stewardship. At that time, we were talking a lot about water quality and quantity because of the Hearst decision, which, if people remember, there was a state Supreme Court decision that that basically said that local governments needed to make sure that there was adequate water for the development that they allowed in their area. Prior to that, local governments were depending on ecology's attestation of that water availability. So that was a big issue. That the way that the state worked through it is updating watershed plans. And we've been tracking that work on the Nisqually, which is done. Chehalis, which is done. Deschutes is still ongoing, but we're tracking that as well. We supported Tumwater, Olympia, Lacey, and Thurston County in developing, and now we're supporting and implementing the Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan. And associated with that, we performed our first update of the Thurston emissions inventory in 2022. Prior to that, the Thurston Climate Action Team was doing that emissions work, and now we have moved that over to TRPC. On economic opportunity, this was one of the reasons that I worked with Michael Cade to become a board member of Thurston Economic Development Council. Michael and I definitely saw the benefit to both of our organizations of really having an improved understanding and better integration between TRPC and the EDC. And I think that's now been a couple of years that I've been doing that. And I believe it has helped immensely, because I certainly have a much better sense of what we as a region are doing around economic development, and it's been really helpful. We've long time partnered with EDC on different projects, and a recent example of that is the EDC staff helped us with this Martin Way corridor work in the outreach to businesses in particular, and having that relationship with EDC as we're reaching out to get information from the private sector. It's so helpful to have the EDC involved in that. Education and outreach. One of the things that the council was talking about at their retreat when they had this as a strategic initiative was we've got the school districts and colleges as part of our membership. Can we look for ways to better integrate that work and better support those members? And that's one of the things that led to partnering on funding that was provided by council to do for North Thurston Public Schools, Olympia, and Tumwater districts to complete the school walk route maps that we have been working on over the past couple of years. And we've been focusing on increasing our social media postings, and we make sure that really virtually all of our project work includes a robust public engagement strategy up front, because like I said at the beginning, we really do view education and outreach as being one of our core functions at TRPC. Housing. When we were talking about housing at that retreat that in 2019, it was before the Regional Housing Council was really up and running. And so a lot of the members were looking for a place where some of those regional housing conversations could occur. Now the Regional Housing Council is set up. One thing, I facilitated a retreat of the Regional Housing Council a couple of years ago to help define that direction. And some of the ways that we're still involved in housing is in relation to our land use work. As an example, there's new requirements that were passed last session around, or maybe the session before. But anyway, new Growth Management Act requirements for cities and counties to allocate housing of different types, to make projections of the housing need at different affordability levels, and then allotting those housing types to the cities and the county to meet that projected need. And that is something that in law that the counties are charged with, but we've been talking with the county and the cities. We have a long history of working through TRPC on things like this. And so this is something that we very well may be working on pretty quickly, because the cities and the county are looking to have this housing projection and the allotment requirements figured out pretty soon, because their next comprehensive plans are due under Growth Management Act in 2025. So this was all to give you a little flavor of how we as an organization use the strategic direction defined by council in 2019, how it informed some of the work that we took on over the past couple of years, work that we may not have sought if we didn't have that strategic direction from council. Now, a little reminder of the 2021 retreat. This occurred in Yelm. It was in person when a little break in COVID during the summer of 2021. And at that time, the council wanted to take a step back from the strategic plan and look at a higher level in terms of vision, mission, and values, really getting into deep conversations about why do the 23 members of TRPC come together to plan around this table. What are we trying to do? And I'm not going to read through the vision, but this vision really outlines through the kind of work we do at TRPC, what kind of vision for what the Thurston region will look like do we share as a council? And this is that statement for the vision that we share that we can achieve through the work of TRPC, in part through the work of TRPC. Then at the 2021 retreat, we also updated the mission to provide visionary collaborative leadership on regional plans, policies, and issues for the benefit of all Thurston region residents. And then it includes the bullets of how we support that mission. And just as a reminder, this appears on every single agenda. The second page of every single agenda you receive from us. This is our guiding document or guiding statement of that. What are we intended to do as an organization? And I really appreciate the values that council defined in 2021. That statements about how accountability, integrity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, sustainability, and collaboration guide our work. The values that we collectively hold, and therefore the expectation that council and policy board have of us as staff and of each other in terms of how we're going to approach the work that we do together through TRPC. And so the original plan was for updating a 2023-25 strategic plan was for me and staff to develop a draft strategic plan for council consideration. However, we as staff have noted that we've had, in fact, I think we've got more than half of our council members weren't here during the previous creation of a strategic plan. A lot has changed over the past few years since we've been dealing with COVID, and things are continuing to change as we're going forward. Council, as we talked about already, is due for a retreat in 2023. And so the staff recommendation, and we're not looking for an action today, we're looking for general direction from council, is would you like to stick with the original plan where I work with staff to develop a draft strategic plan for your consideration? Or would you like to have the 2023 retreat build from the work of the last retreat on vision, mission, and values to have some concentrated time as a council at that retreat to work on the 2023-2025 strategic plan? And so that's the discussion I'm looking for is, do you want staff to draft it or do you want to work on it at the retreat? And then also we can confirm, do we want the retreat in September, which is what I was hearing a lot of in the earlier conversation. And I will stop sharing. Turn it back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. First question, let's get to the low-hanging fruit. Are there any objections to the idea of us settling on that September date for retreat? Okay, so Mark, it seems like we have agreement on that.
Fantastic.
Next question, and I see Robin is up first to give some feedback, is how do we want to proceed? Do we want staff to begin a draft, or do we want to have time to do the drafting? Mark, presumably staff would do some drafting, obviously, and would bring some materials for our consideration from like the last strategic plan for us to consider how we want to integrate those things. But do we want to be more hands-on or less hands-on? And I have Robin in the queue, and I'll watch the queue for others.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that it seems as though we would naturally use the existing strategic plan as the draft that we work from. But I like the idea of us having time during the retreat that we have in September to refresh what we have currently and see if there are things missing or things that we want to polish or change.
Yeah, great. I've got Debbie and then Scott and then Chris.
My suggestion would be for us to talk about it and using the previous one as a draft of what went well and what didn't go well. And maybe there's new topics to discuss. One of the things that I want to make sure, because we were doing the transportation portion of it, but sometimes I'm thinking our partners are not connecting with that as well. So I'm actually one of the members of the Marvin, well, the WashDOT I-5 corridor, and the first 4 is on Marvin Road to Mounts Road. And one of the things is somehow we get our partners like WashDOT to recognize that intercity transit and not Pierce Transit needs to be at the table for those items, since Pierce Transit doesn't have much influence in what happens in Thurston County. So making sure that the correct partners at the table, and maybe adding that as a strategic plan of how we educate those outside. I know that TRPC wasn't the driver for that, but I think that we need to make sure that those were, that our local organizations are at the table for important things. So I'm not sure if that fits within our strategic plan, but maybe somehow of how we outreach other partners to make sure that whatever affects us, is it housing, transportation, those kinds of things, can do. And I don't know what influence TRPC has in that, but trying to make our voices heard.
Thanks, Debbie. I have a note here too that perhaps I want to be mindful of time. So I think also there might be an opportunity, if you have strong feelings about helping to coordinate the retreat and provide some support to staff and thinking about how to organize that, maybe let me and Mark know. So Debbie, if that's an important consideration and you want to be part of that dialogue, let's send us an email. And I mean, it is volunteering for another subcommittee maybe, but okay. So any feedback one way or another, do we feel like having staff do a front load a lot of work, or doing more hands-on work in the retreat? Scott and then Chris.
Yeah, I agree with Rob, and we can start with the old strategic plan, but Mark's comment is right. There's a lot of context that's changed. And I think that that's what the staff can work up, is what's changed in context, some of the projects, some of the focus at the state level, as well as internally within the region. And that would be a very valuable briefing for the new members, as well as for those of us who are just checking in periodically and not directly involved in those projects. And I'm interested in helping in the planning if you need anything.
Great.
Thank you, Scott. And I would just throw in the work that happened 2 years ago, wrapping that into the old strategic plan, using that as a lens through which to view those new projects. Chris, go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks for running an excellent meeting here. Just briefly, I just want to talk about water. My water management hat as a PUD commissioner, since we run a water utility in the rural areas of our county, roughly 75 to 8,000 customers inside Thurston County and a bunch outside Thurston County, but not to exceed a quarter of our amount. Anyway, what I wanted to say is that water resources, which I closely monitor, having been former chair of the state association's water committee and just been involved in the process, is reorganizing its 2030 policy. Ecology has a bunch of policies instead of rulemaking, for those familiar with state government, where it's more difficult to challenge what they're doing because it's an internal policy rather than an open public rule, which you guys know the process of if you've been involved with state government. So they're going to change that roughly. They're starting it in April this year and moving to finish it probably by the end of the year. And it deals with the municipal water law, which affects any of us that are water providers. Even the county is a water provider. So I just want to point that out to you, that they're changing that rule and affecting how we can act on our inchoate water rights. I could go on, but I'm not going to. My point is that we need to figure out a way of adding some value added as a community, which I know Gary's run on this subject of water countywide. So I know he's concerned about it when he first ran. So I know that we need to better manage our resources. That's what I've been up to at the PUD as it's been growing. And I just want people to focus in on where we're at with this, because we need better coordination than we've seen up to now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And I guess I will just surface that a collective desire for this thinking and the strategic planning is to be thinking deeply about how we're being more connected even outside of Thurston County municipalities. So it sounds like state connections, other regional connections. So that is definitely bubbling up. Is there any other feedback from Mark? Otherwise, I would sort of sum up that there's a desire to kind of like split the difference. Like, yes, let's look at what we've done before and maybe having staff help us frame that that conversation within that context of like where we've been, but that it sounds like members do want an opportunity to sort of wrestle and engage deeply in thinking about where we're going based on the values and the new reality.
That sounds great, Chair. I feel like we as staff have the direction we need. So thank you.
Great. And then I will just say I heard both Scott and possibly Debbie interested in helping with thinking about the retreat. Debbie, I don't want to put you on the spot, so you can opt out too if you're like, nah, that's not for me. But if anybody would like to be a part of that planning and thinking, please reach out to Mark and I, because I think it's really valuable to have a handful of members who are really like considering how to create meaningful engagement and also create an opportunity for us to build relationships with each other, as we do have so many new members since the last time we talked about strategic planning. So is that anything else on this agenda item people would like to share? Because it's time for Karen's legislative update. Karen, take it away.
I have a PowerPoint slide to do. Let me just talk for a minute, though. I wanted to let you know that we will send out a copy of the bill report on House Bill 1181. The bill report is sort of the lay version, but let me tell you that the bill report is 17 pages long. So this is a fairly complex bill, and was introduced in a different form last year. It's a governor request bill. And the bill report should tell you it is moving in the House. It is passed out of House local government, and we'll have a hearing in appropriations on Monday. There was also a do not pass recommendation, and Representative Griffey from the 35th district, which is one of the districts that we are part of, did vote against the bill. So we'll send you an updated bill report so that you can read that, and don't hesitate to get in touch if you have other questions. It was certainly on my list, but it isn't one that we are officially, part of our priorities. So here we are. About the legislative priorities. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to go through and remind you that our priority list, in addition to saying, here's what's really important to us, we always remind our legislators that we work together to save our constituents. And this is to remind them that if they take all of our local money away, then we're not partners anymore. So this is our sort of gentle, depending on who we're talking to, message that we need to work together, and that funding appropriately at the local level and at the state and federal level can help support all of our constituents. Next slide. So we had some statements about general transportation, support for public transportation, rural and special needs transportation, cross-county services. Many of you have read that there was been a lawsuit filed about the basic budget strategies last year. Who knows? Everyone's moving forward as if the the lawsuit will resolve some way, and we're all moving forward as if it doesn't exist right now. We also have language in our message to our members about preserving and maintaining the system. So maintenance has been a really important piece. And one of the things we mentioned specifically is the Yelm Loop. When I talk about I-5, I will talk about this too. And that is why all these projects are still in the budget. Some of the early when funds would appear had some of these projects moved out 6 years. And so I know that many of us are working with our legislators from different viewpoints to say, we really can't wait this long. So next slide. And this is about
Sorry, I've got a
I-5 and
question.
I'm sorry.
Hey, Joe, can we hold till the end of slides? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
So on I-5, the same message is true, which is that we need to act more quickly. And part of the issue on this is not only the urgency of, I'd just as soon not have water on I-5 because we had to push things out a little further. But also this idea that we have done, Department of Transportation has done this NEPA work, the scientific piece, environmental piece. And if we push things out too long, we have to start over on some of those things. So there's a kind of a clock running. So we have had active support from all of our members on this. Representative Barkas, who is on the minority member of the House Transportation Committee, has been very active in supporting this, as have others. So we're continuing to get great support, and we're mentioning it to everyone we can possibly think of, and from a variety of groups. Not only does TRPC support this, but also our local regional coalition, which includes the cities and towns and the port and the EDC and South Puget Sound Community College. So there's a lot of traction around this, and fingers crossed, we're making progress. Next slide. Rural State Highways as Main Street is our next one. This is a kind of a combined package, and it looks at our rural projects that communities have already invested in, and says, can you provide some funding to get us to the next step? And there's been general support, but I would say a little less than on I-5. So we're continuing to say, wait a minute, we need to support the rural communities just like we support the urban communities. Is the package too big? What is it that would help you support this in a more direct way? So we have met with some of our legislators. We're waiting for meetings with others. So we'll continue to work this. And like I said, it's not as though people don't support it. It is, well, it's kind of big. And so we're trying to find out, well, okay, what if we do this program, but we asked for this much funding? It's like, who do you need us to be? And then we'll be happy to be that to get this project started. Next slide. The next piece was the regional airport and broadband. Obviously, the regional airport discussions have been going many different directions, and there's this whole rethinking whether it can be in a green space environment, and then Yakima stepping forward to say, hey, we'd like to have it. And so we haven't been doing much conversation around this as things are moving forward. All of our representatives know how you feel about this and what your concerns are, and so we're not spending a lot of time in our short little meetings talking about it. The next is broadband. Again, we have general support for this. In fact, I was talking to our new broadband chair in Commerce, and we're trying to make arrangements to bring him in to have a conversation with you in the next several months. But again, support. But I would say there's maybe 20 bills that deal with broadband that we're still looking at and figuring out what direction it's going to go. There's also a federal map that has been created, and there's a lot of concerns about that federal map and making sure that it covers all the areas that we care about, especially if funding at the beginning is limited to that federal map. Next slide. Regional mobility grants. This is the piece where we would be asking for metropolitan planning organizations, rural transportation planning organizations, and tribes to also be able to apply for these funds. And what we have heard from our members is a lot of support for this. We, in fact, have a member that is ready to support it, and he's working on some language with staff. And he especially, this was Representative Barkis, but others have weighed in on it. They like the idea of an MPO or an RTPO being able to coordinate smaller jurisdictions to apply for this funding. Because it's kind of a big deal to apply, members have been interested in the idea of us applying on behalf of Rainier, Tenino, Yelm, Bucota. And so we're continuing to work this. Next slide. So I just wanted to tell you where we're at. I am not going to give you an update on all of the bills that we're tracking. We're mainly trying to focus on these bills. There's been, about 700 bills introduced in each the House and Senate. Again, we've met with some legislators. We are moving into the weeks of the first and second cutoffs. And while we pay attention to all the bills before that, by the first cutoff, you have a sense of what has legs. And so that's when you can really start tracking this. I would say, I think there are 200 bills that deal with housing in a variety of ways. And so really, while that's not one of our priorities, it's something that we're looking at. And so we're waiting till they kind of hone down to maybe 50 bills about housing that really might be moving to do that. We also have a deadline coming up of budget requests to Transportation Committee leadership and other budget chairs to what they want to see in the budget. And obviously the budget bills have already come out, but we're going to start looking at the end of February in really starting to hone in on those. And then the legislature adjourned sine die on April 28th. So that hopefully will be the end of sessions this year. So that's what I know. Please continue to send me any bills or issues that you have concerns about. I'm happy to find out what's going on, talk to staff, see if there's some inside scoop. You'll notice if you look at 1181 that the bill report is something that, again, explains in more lay terms. When you get to the end of the bill report, it also talks about what organizations testified for and against the bill and other sort of that just brought some information and what their arguments were. And so that's a way that you can kind of get a sense of what's happening with the bill without having to listen to the whole meeting if you don't choose to. So that's what I have today, catching us up on time, and we'll continue to meet with folks.
Thank you very much, Karen. We've got a queue, so we're going to go to Joe and then Amy.
Thank you. I was wondering, you mentioned the Yelm Loop and some other projects being funded in transportation. My thought or my understanding was it was taken out of the recommended transportation budget by the governor. I was wondering if you had any conversations with chairs, vice chairs, or ranking members from Senate or House Transportation regarding the Yelm Loop.
Yes, we have mentioned it, especially as the necessity of an alternate route when there are problems on I-5. So I don't know that it's going to be in the budget, but remember that we're dealing with, and you know this, Joe, but for others, we're dealing with the House budget, the Senate budget, and the governor's budget. So what finally happens is still to be revealed. So we are bringing that message forward, and we've had positive results. People understand what happens to your community with issues on I-5. And they also understand that issues on R5 are problematic and they're more frequent and getting worse. So we're continuing to push for it to be in there.
Sure, and I appreciate all the work you're doing on it, Karen, and it's very important, obviously, for the region. But I was more specifically wondering if you had a conversation with Leas directly or with Phi directly.
No, but I'm trying to get in to see both of those people. So, with help from other legislators. So those are some ones that we are working on. And what I also want to do is get approval from them. As I said, budget requests are being given in the next few weeks. And so I'm trying to at least get approval to send in something to them for consideration.
I would suggest doing that quicker. I've been told it was earlier. It was on the 30th that they were due of January. So
the 28th of February for transportation, for Senate transportation. So.
Okay, that's just what I've been hearing from Lisa's office. So.
Yeah, I know. It's difficult to,
sure.
You know, apparently I'm just not their most important person they want to see. And, you know, with all you guys, but, you know, it's hard to get in there, but we will continue to bang on that door.
Thanks, Karen. Okay. We've got a queue and we're coming close to the end of our meeting. So I'm going to go to Amy and then Chris and ask for brevity. Thank you.
Karen, Commissioner Ayala mentioned that there was some funding that was previously allocated to the Nisqually tribe that was then pulled back. Is that something that you can comment on, or is there a future for that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
If it is the transportation funding for the Nisqually Bridge area and that restoration, then yes, it was pushed out. So it's still in there, but in the sort of aging calendar that they do, it was pushed out several biennia. So that's part of our message to people is, no, that doesn't work for us. We need it sooner.
So they thought they were getting it now and they're getting it who knows when. Okay, thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great question. Chris, go ahead.
Karen, just briefly, culverts. As you know, the culvert settlement with the Supreme Court decision is being implemented. It affects utility crossings. An example would be one that we have with a county road in my neighborhood, Green Cove Creek area, which is a salmon-bearing stream in northwest Thurston County. Not to be neglected for all these other parts of our county, but occasionally it's good to focus on them. I just want to say to people that I asked my staff to review all our water systems in Thurston County as to where culverts might be a future problem if they fail like this one did, which is in a very deep gulch. I came up with 5 just in Thurston County. So we need to get ahead of this problem as culverts age. And many of you don't know this, but I used to do culvert surveys in Clark County. So I know the nature of the problem quite well firsthand. So I just want to say to you guys, if funding can be found for that, it is a fish passage issue. That's why, the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission, all the other groups that promote fish passage are involved. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Any other questions for Karen about how things are going? It's fast and furious. Thank you, Karen. I know it's sort of like the big, I know, right? I mean, happy almost retirement.
Well, there's that moment of saying, is this important? Is this a bill important? And then you suddenly hear that, on page 7, line 7, it has nothing to do with fish passages, but there's something about fish passages. So you end up having to go track it down, even though it looked like it was about police retirement.
Yep. Welcome to a busy session. Well, thank you very much, Karen, for the wrap up, and we'll keep us in the loop. So we've
Okay.
got a report from outside committees next with Helen, and then we've got Mark right after that. So Helen, what do you have to share with us?
Okay, well, I guess I'd better be quick too. Super quick, I guess. The topics covered on legislation, the PSRC's focus is on housing. So they didn't talk about transportation, they talked about housing. And I guess what might be of interest to people there, they sort of split things up. Their mantra up there is supply, stability, and subsidy. And so on the supply, I think you're probably pretty familiar with the middle housing stuff, but stability, it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of action around rent control. You know, rent is a really important issue, and there's lots around that. And then as the stability element, and then on subsidy, there's also HB 1628 that's looking at increasing the tax on properties over 5 million, the REIT, to pay for affordable housing. So that's kind of what's going on there in the housing world. On that one that Ursula Euler brought up, I just wanted to point out that that's HB 1181 about climate. The reason, you know, the way it was sort of framed by the PSRC is that, you know, for the comp plan review stuff, climate is still not a required element for comp plans. And so they're looking for ways to require at least some aspects of climate change in the new comp plans. And so that's what this HB 1181 is aimed towards. So I thought that might be worth knowing and considering. In terms of the things that they talked about, and I will provide links on this, and I would love a chance to talk more about it maybe at the next meeting. There was a lot of discussion around the housing public survey that was done jointly by PSRC and the Department of Commerce, and the very important results of that survey. Basically, at the real fundamental level, it showed a heck of a lot of concern about affordable housing. Just huge. It is the #1 issue, not only in the Puget Sound region, but statewide. And the survey gets into some fine-grained detail about that. And it also gets into some detail about potential solutions and how people feel about it. So I'd love to be able to present about that a little bit later on as we're moving into the comp plan review stuff. And the other topic, the PSRC jurisdictions are already into their comp plan review process. So they've done their affordable housing or their housing needs assessments, and they're moving into, you know, what to do about that. So one of the tools that I think is really of interest is the housing place typology tool that they've put together. And I really want to share that too, but I'll share the link. It combines mapping with a kind of a rubric to help jurisdictions figure out what their housing needs are, and then sort of directs them towards the most useful tools that they can use to make that the most impactful. So I think it's going to be a fantastic tool for doing the comp plan review process. Unfortunately, that housing survey that was done statewide, Thurston County was not one of the counties sampled, and I'm really sad about that because it would have been hugely useful. And then finally, just in terms of upcoming things, there will be a joint board session that, of course, I think anybody from Thurston County would be welcome to attend on. They're calling it Affirm, Counter, Transform on April 28th from 10 to noon. And it's about the equity stuff and how to have difficult conversations about racial equity and how to educate others about it as you're trying to do your policy work. So having just come out of some discussion around Grand Mound and equity, I can say those kinds of, any help we can get on that is great. So that's about it. Thanks. And I'll try to send, I'll have links sent out.
Yeah, we'll look forward to the written report. That's always really helpful. Thank you, Helen. Mark, take it away.
Yeah, most importantly, as those who hopped on early to the meeting, I'm super excited to introduce Crosby Carter as an associate planner. Any of you who have done hiring recently know how hard it is to find excellent people. And I feel so fortunate that we were able to bring Crosby on. Many of you will know her from some of her past work. She worked for Thurston Chamber as the coordinator for Thurston Thrives. She's worked at Thurston County, at Olympia. She's got a lot of background in housing, currently also works in real estate. So her links in our community and some of the background that she has in housing and real estate, excellent additions to our staff. And she's getting started working on some of the work around the electric vehicle charging infrastructure, commute trip reduction, but she is going to be plugged into a lot of different efforts that we have. And I could not be more excited to say, welcome, Crosby. Okay. And then really quickly, I also want to mention that there is so much transportation funding out there. We're scrambling to stay on top of it. Our jurisdictions are scrambling to stay on top of it. There was recently a Safe Streets and Roads for All funding opportunity, and we just learned that Lacey received $68,000 under that opportunity. Thurston County $264,000, and so this is just another comment that the iron is hot around transportation funding, and so we're going to keep trying to stay on top of that and take advantage of the federal funds that are available. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. We are a little over time, but I also want to give folks an opportunity to share out. If there's anything you would like to share out, we had such a wonderful meeting with so much robust participation. Thank you, everybody, for bringing your full, engaged, authentic selves to this work and asking so many good questions. And now I want to give you an opportunity if you want to share something from your jurisdiction, or if you have like a takeaway to send us off into our weekend, something you're excited to bring back. Any hands up? Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, this is thank you to Robin Vasquez, Carolyn Cox, City of Lacey, Graham Sackerson. You all may have heard that the Lacey Makerspace was provided a $1 million appropriations for federal government through Senator Murray's office. And, you know, you started thinking about it as she toured that facility 2 weeks ago. And the strategy a couple of years ago was to potentially create, and how do we create a very inclusive, accessible economic development system for a number of individuals from K through retired folks. And that really was a stamp of approval of the vision and the work that's going on there. And then I had that follow-up conversation with the good staff at the City of Olympia about the connection between the makerspace and what they're doing at the Armory building. And I'm just very excited about those two pillars of economic development. But I didn't want to let this moment pass by without the thank you for the good work of the City of Lacey in getting this funding for that. It makes all the difference in the world. So thank you. And if anybody needs a tour or would like a tour of that space, contact me afterwards and we'll get you hooked up. And I know Graham has given a number of tours. He'd love to do that as well, but we want to make sure that you have an opportunity to walk through, touch and see, maybe not necessarily touch all the equipment, but see the equipment and see what's going on there. Thank you very much. Thank you, Hillary.
Thank you so much for sharing, Michael. That is really something to be celebrated. Hooray. It looks like, sorry. Oh, Chris, go ahead.
I'm gonna let you go soon here, but I just wanted to add that next 2-year campaign cycle, that'd be 2024. Marie Cantwell's up for re-election. She's currently chair of the Commerce Committee. It's been that way for 2 years already, and at least for the next 2 years, depending on the results of that election. So want to point that out just simply because she was the one that gave us the Growth Management Act when she was in the legislature as a House member, a very young House member from Snohomish County. Mount Falls Terrace, whatever it is, there, Mount Lake Terrace. So she now lives in Edmonds, but I want to point that out simply because she holds the purse strings on a lot of money that can go. And I've seen Edmonds and Shoreline, because of Patty Murray's involvement with that city, do a lot of work on urban renewal that the rest of the state hasn't much achieved. So maybe Bremerton and maybe Vancouver, but that's about it. So I urge you to focus in on her and trying to get her, because she'll be out in the community for re-election, to get her attention on projects we need here, because we could use it.
Thanks, Chris. Any other share outs or celebrations? Oh, Mark, go ahead.
Chair, my apologies, but I do just want to clarify that and make sure members know is this is the council meetings are not a place to talk about elections and who might be running and when. It's just an important reminder. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder, Mark. Sorry, I was looking at Clark's picture. Yeah, good reminder that we're here to discuss the work of our government entities. So thanks for that reminder.
Sorry, my bad.
It's always a good opportunity to focus on networking with all of our elected officials, but maybe just not within the context of their campaigns.
Right.
Any other things to share out? Well, thank you so much, everyone, for such a great meeting. Thanks to our guests and staff who were on hand to answer questions that present, and members who brought all this good bit of feedback. We are adjourned. Happy weekend.
Thanks, everybody.